Hi, I'm Chuck Koslowske, and I've been asked to talk a little today about marking audition cuts and communicating with your audition pianists. Having played lots of auditions in my life, some of the most enjoyable for MTW, I can guarantee you that a well-marked audition cut can automatically help lead to a more successful audition experience. So often when performers mention to me that pianists seem to be having a great deal of trouble playing one of their audition cuts, I find it's only occasionally because the music in question is too demanding pianistically or musically, but more often the real culprit is simply a confusingly marked cut. You can find lots of resources online listing the do's and don'ts of marking audition cuts, and today I'm simply going to be echoing a lot of those same common sense ideas, for they bear repeating, because while you might not be in control of how well we may or may not actually play the piano, you are definitely in control of how well we might understand the shape of your audition cut. With any cut, one of your main objectives is to differentiate on the page between the music that is to be played and sung and the music which is not. But before we get to talking about marking up those cuts, I want to discuss a few basic ideas that you've probably heard over and over and you might be sick of hearing. But let's be honest, they need to be repeated because these are issues we pianists confront all the time. And a lot of what we're going to talk about will seem to deal mostly with paper music, good old-fashioned printed paper scores. I'm a little too old to engage in a debate on the pros and cons of iPads and tablets versus printed music. But really, any of these concepts will pertain to your audition cuts in whatever format you present them in. First, and this will seem really basic, but make sure all the music is on the page. So often we pianists are presented with music where the bass line is missing from the bottom, or the melody and some of the words are missing from the top. Even more distracting, the left margin has sometimes disappeared, which leaves us pianists without clefs and sometimes even key signatures for a while, which can really leave us at sea. So don't trust that your printer worked. Go through all your music, check that everything's there. And remember, when you're copying from an oversized score, you usually have to reduce somewhere around the neighborhood of 92% to get everything on that page. There is no excuse for one-sided pages. Let's be honest, you know you've done it. But you can atone for these crimes by either investing in a two-sided printer, which I know might be a little expensive, or even just buying some Scotch tape. Tape those one-sided pages front and back. Don't give us twice as many page turns as we need. Don't make the cut more difficult to handle than it needs to be. Also, there's no excuse for loose pages. They fly off the music stand. They're difficult to handle. So for your next birthday, ask for a 3-hole punch and a 3-ring binder. You and your pianist will be glad you did. If you need to secure one-sided pages front to back, please don't ever use staples. We pianists can easily catch our finger on the back of a staple and get a nasty cut. And honestly, I've seen colleagues bleeding on the keys before. And while it might sometimes seem like we're creating a crime scene at the keyboard, there's no reason to make it look like one too. So please, no staples. Get some tape. Tape those pages together. Clean copies of your music are generally desirable, except for, of course, the markings which pertain directly to your cut. We pianists don't really need to see all your personal notes from your voice lessons and your coachings, and sometimes those types of notes can betray you a little bit. For instance, if you sing some wrong notes and rhythms, and we pianists see them circled in your music, that's a good sign that, oh, that was a problem spot earlier, and it's still a problem spot. I wonder if that person can correct mistakes. Whereas in a clean copy, we might just put down those mistakes to live performance and not think much of them. Don't give us the chance to second guess you, because sometimes, remember, we pianists might be involved with the production at hand, and our input might be asked. So don't give us a chance to second guess you in that respect. On a personal note regarding clean scores, I happen to look down quite a bit at poor spelling. It's a failing, I know. I'm working on it. And I can't tell you the number of times I see the word legato spelled with 2 T's. And automatically I think much less of the singer. So avoid such harsh judgments. by giving us a clean copy of the score with just your markings that pertain to the cut. Be careful when you're printing music from online sources, especially from the PDFs of scores one finds online. Aside from the questionable legality of these sources, oftentimes these scores have been scanned at a really low resolution, and it makes it really difficult for us pianists to read. Give yourself a little test. Look at the page. Can you see the lines of the staff really clearly, or are they quite faded? If you can't really tell the difference between lines and spaces on the staff, that's a pretty good indication that the pianist is going to struggle a lot. So if those scores you're finding online are not very readable, try and find some better printed music. You usually can. If you can't, you might need to take your cut and enter it into music notation software so that it's legible. But don't give yourself a poor audition just because the pianist can't actually make out the notes on the page. So be careful of the music you print, especially nowadays. Clearly mark starting and stopping points, even if your cut is pretty straightforward. A lot of times singers come up and they'll point and they'll say, I'm going to start here, and then they turn the page and they say, and I'm going to end here. Seems simple enough, no cuts in the music, straight through. However, I can say it often happens to me, playing auditions hour after hour. The singer walks away, gets ready to go present their audition, and I turn back to the first page and say, did they say they were going to start here or here? Don't let us have that confusion. Even if it seems obvious, mark in your starting and stopping places. It will give us a lot of good information. Also, write in how you'd like to start the cut, whether it's a bell tone or an intro. You're already giving us a lot of good information to start with right off the bat. If you're starting in the middle of a piece, make sure that you've written the title of the song and the composer, and if it's from a show, the show it's from, up at the top of the page. Because we might not recognize a song right away looking at the middle of it, but oftentimes just seeing the title clues us into so much information. So go ahead, make sure to write it at the top if it's not already there. Also, if there are any tempo indications from earlier in the song that pertain to the section you're doing, copy those over as well. You're giving us a lot of helpful info. Most old school cuts consist of one self-contained chunk of music from a song. For example, think of the typical bridge to the end 16-bar cut that's used for so many of our songs from the Great American Songbook. And when we have cuts like this, it's a pretty simple matter of marking a starting point and a stopping point, giving your tempo, and then going to sing your piece. What could be simpler? However, in recent years, we see a lot more cuts getting much more complicated, with a few bars taken from this section and then jumping to this section over here to these bars, and then we play a few bars and we jump over here, and then we jump to the coda of the song. And these types of cut and pasted or Frankenstein cuts can really be helpful in creating an interesting dramatic arc to the cut, but they do make it more confusing for us pianists in many ways. However, there are a whole lot of things you can do in marking your score to make it easier on us. Once again, your main goal is to differentiate clearly between the music that is to be played and the music that is not. The time-honored way is using brackets. You put a bracket where you're beginning a section, and then when you're at the end of a section, before you skip to the next one, you put a closing bracket, then generally cross out the music that's not being played, and then at the beginning of the next section, put another bracket. This sort of combinations of brackets and crossing out the music that's not to be played can much of the time work quite successfully. Highlighting the brackets can oftentimes be helpful. It helps our eyes sort of jump from one place to the other. Also, what can be helpful is taking white paper, blank white paper, and putting it over the music that is not to be played, the cut bars, and then recopying it. That way, we just have music, blank space, and music where it starts up again, and our eyes have to go from the end of one section to another. Of course, you can also literally cut and paste bars together from one section to the next. That can be a little tricky sometimes because the music doesn't always line up. But let's take a look at some of these ways to basically mark a score. Let's take a look at a pretty typical audition cut and how we might mark it. Please pardon my very shaky and inexpert camera work with my iPhone, not my forte. Anyway, this is the bridge to the end of the trolley song from Meet Me in St. Louis, and since we're starting at the bridge, naturally we're starting in the middle of the music. So, the title of the song, the show, and the composers have been written in at the top. Already a lot of useful information for us pianists. The music that's not being played, starting at the top of the page, is crossed out. The start of the cut is clearly indicated, highlighting never hurts, and the tempo indication from earlier in the piece, in this case brightly, has been written in. Now, like I said, this is pretty much a cut that's the bridge to the end. But like so many songs from our Great American Songbook, the printing conventions at the time were generally to add a repeat of a chorus in, whether that chorus was repeated in performance or not. Oftentimes it's just the case that it's a first and second ending, in which case, of course, you can just cross off the first ending, go to the second and call it a day. In this particular score, it's a dal segno al coda, goes back to an earlier part in the chorus, and then jumps to the coda at the end, giving us a repeat plus the extended ending. But nobody wants to hear you sing the same music again. Nobody's got time for that. We just want to jump straight to the coda. So, the coda happens to be at the top of the next page. We just put in a bracket where we want the music to jump. Highlighting again can be helpful. Put another bracket in where we want the music to start back up. And then it's straight from there to the end. And the end is marked clearly as well. What's nice about this particular cut in the middle of the song is that there's not a page turn. The pages have been arranged so that we can just jump with our eye from the left over here to the right page over here. While it's not always possible to arrange cuts without a page turn, whenever you can lay out the pages to avoid a page turn over a cut, that's really helpful for us, because our eyes are already searching for the place to jump to. When you add in a page turn, that makes it even a little bit trickier. Otherwise, that's a pretty straightforward cut, pretty easy to see. Let's say we have the same cut, starting the same way, everything indicated, but we want to shorten it a bit. So what I've done is I've cut out the second 8 bars, jumping from the end of the first 8 bars to the beginning of the third chunk of 8 bars. Now, just so you know, this is not a good cut at all. It doesn't make much sense. Don't sing this. This is just for an example. But once again, just because we're cutting out music, we're just going to put in a bracket, cross off the music we don't need, and put in another bracket where we start back up. Pretty easy to see. And the rest of it follows through in the exact same way. Now, if you want to make it really easy on us pianists, there's sort of a time-honored do-it-yourself way with scissors, photocopier, and some tape. To get rid of the music, we don't play. Because if we don't see it, we're probably not going to try to play anything, right? So here, you just take blank white paper, tape it over the bars that we crossed out in the other versions, then recopy it, and voila, your cut starts right with the music you want it to start with. Makes it pretty darn simple for us pianists. But notice, and this is important whenever you're doing any cut in the middle of a piece, if you're starting in the middle and you get rid of the music that comes before it, you may no longer have the clefs or key signatures. Here, we've written in the clefs, just to make sure the pianist knows what they're looking at. Treble clef, bass clef. This piece happens to be in C major, so there wasn't any key signature, any flats or sharps to write in, but if there were at the beginning of the score, you'd want to write those in. Same thing if you have a cut in the middle of a piece and there's a key change, you want to make sure that you write in any new information at wherever the cut starts back up. And here, we just go from there. Same cut as that shortened version we just saw, but we got rid of all the extra music in a pretty simple cut and paste sort of way. And the same thing with the coda, got rid of all that extra music on the page and jumped to the top and then to the end. Now that's a good no-brainer for most of us because like I said, if we don't see the music, we're not going to play it. Well, some people might try, but I don't think most of us will. So you might say, oh, but look at all the blank space. And it's true. This is a lot of blank space. And you could copy and paste each score, fit this bottom one in the middle, this top one on the bottom of the page before, and turn it into a 3-page cut rather than a 4-page cut. But even if you didn't go to that trouble, how it's laid out here, even with the blank space, is still pretty darn user-friendly for the pianist. Those are some good old school ways of marking cuts. However, if your cut is of the more modern Frankenstein variety, consisting of lots of different little chunks of music from different sections of the song strung together, and meaning that the pianist is going to have to jump around a whole lot, then it can be well worth your time and effort to enter that music into some music notation software, such as Finale, MuseScore, Sibelius, etc., and creating one continuous musical excerpt. By eliminating all that jumping around, you're certainly making the cut easier to explain when you present the music to the pianist, and of course, you're making it far easier for the pianist to read. So if it's an excerpt you think you'll use a lot in auditions, it's well worth the time and energy to either learn how to do it yourself or even pay somebody to do it. But the programs are not too difficult to master. I can tell you that if my technologically challenged brain can work its way around MuseScore without much difficulty, then anybody can. One very important point I want to reiterate. Whenever you cut from section to section, be very careful about taking note of any musical changes that have happened in the music you're cutting, such as time signature changes, key changes, clef changes, tempo changes, etc. Anything like that, make sure you take notice of and mark at the beginning of the new section of music. Don't assume we know whatever changes have happened. We might, but don't assume that. If you're singing different words than are printed in the music, please, please, please write them in. So often singers come to an audition and they say, oh, I'm going to start here. I'm going to sing different words, but you just play what's on the page. That seems simple enough, but if it's a song with which we're not familiar, or if it's a style that invites a lot of freedom on the singer's part, like in a lot of pop rock styles, and they might not necessarily be sticking to those printed pitches and rhythms, then that melodic line that's printed doesn't actually help us a lot ensemble-wise all the time. So the text is frequently our best anchor when we're sight reading through a cut. So if you're singing different words, do yourself a favor, write them in. Your audition will go much more smoothly. There's always the debate to use or not to use the plastic sleeve protectors. That is the question. And there really isn't any right answer because no two individuals agree. I would say that most colleagues I've talked to throughout my life, and including myself, don't really care for them. I find them difficult to turn, but then there are many pianists who find them much easier to turn than just plain paper. So who knows? I'd say follow your heart. If you want to use them, use them. If you don't, don't. With our increased awareness of viruses and such, however, I suppose that in the future, one benefit of those plastic sleeve protectors could be that they can be easily wiped off with an antibacterial wipe before you present your music to the pianist. That could be a consideration in the future. But for now, I say follow your heart. Do what you want to do. When you have a nice, well laid out and marked cut, obviously your communication with the pianist should require less detailed instruction at the beginning, which is also a benefit, especially since in the future maybe you will have to be socially distanced from the pianist. So marking your cut clearly, keeping it as simple as can be and as straightforward as can be is going to benefit you so much. When you're giving your tempo, I always think it's most helpful, for me at any rate, if the singer does sing a selection of the piece that gives the rhythm in an effective manner. You don't need to sing too loudly. Sometimes people behind a table say they don't really like to hear the singing when you're giving a tempo. You can sing pretty softly. Feel free to give a pulse, whether you want to tap or conduct a little, maybe just don't conduct or snap in our face. But keeping a pulse is a very helpful thing. And by all means, point out big changes in the tempo. But it's not necessary to point out every single place where you're going to take time or speed up. Write that in the music. If it's clearly marked in the score and you perform your cut with conviction, we will probably, most of us, be right there with you. But really, when you go through and say, I'm going to slow down a little here, and then I'll speed up, and then I'll take a little time, and I'm holding this note, there's no way we can absorb all that in the moments before you sing. So only tell us what is absolutely important and make sure the rest is marked. And most importantly, sing it the way you want to sing it. And chances are we'll be there right with you. At any rate, I hope some of these basic ideas help you mark your audition music better, and hopefully we're back to auditioning soon. Stay safe and healthy, and enjoy the rest of your summer. Bye-bye.